This is Ed Rep Radio, presented by Eastman Music Company. This is Ed Rep Radio, a podcast to bring you ideas and information from industry experts you can use on the road every day. Presented by Eastman Music Company, and I'm your host, Shane Duell. Over the years, I've been very fortunate to have attended the NASMD conference, both as an Ed Rep and now as a regional sales director for Eastman. One of my favorite parts of NASMD is hearing from sales trainers on the topic of growing your skills as a salesperson. There was a session years ago, and unfortunately I can't remember the name of the session or the presenter, but the topic was on being a trusted advisor to your customers. The presenter talked about going beyond the role of just a salesperson. Another presenter at NASMD talked about being a partner instead of a peddler, and the concept is the same. Becoming a go-to source of information, advice, and knowledge for your customers. A trusted advisor is someone that the customers immediately turn to when it comes to instruments they should buy for the school, suggestions on what type of step-up instruments work best for students' needs, which accessories will help their students succeed, ideas on recruiting more beginners, and so much more. When I first became an Ed Rep in 2004, I met such an individual out in the schools I serviced, and unfortunately, he worked for the other music store in the area. He was the person that the band and orchestra directors and the private teacher community turned to as their trusted advisor because he had such a deep knowledge base of instruments, accessories, brands, what worked best for each individual and each musical situation. He also built a loyal customer base and a high level of sales and rentals each year. He was very tough competition. His name was Ryan Richman. Today, Ryan is the Vice President of Eastman Music Company, and I am very fortunate to call him my boss, colleague, and great friend. We're going to hear from Ryan today on how he built such a knowledge base on products and the industry, how he became the trusted advisor to his customers and built such a loyal following, and some great tips on working with private teachers. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Shane. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I'd like to start with your background in music as a student and woodwind player and hear about your journey through the music industry to where you are today as the Vice President of Eastman Music Company.
Well, I started in music as a young person. My family wasn't all that musical growing up, and my interest in music came from some of the friends that I had in my neighborhood and whatnot. I had a good friend who played violin at a very young age, and I remember when in my elementary school orchestra was offered, I think in the 5th grade, I signed up, and I signed up to play violin. My great-great-grandfather's violin was in the family, I believe, and so that was loaned to me. In retrospect, it was probably way too big, but it was what my family had, and I did that for my 5th grade year, and then the program didn't continue into 6th grade, so I was without music. And I remember when the junior high band came to play for my elementary school, I remember the impact that had on me, listening to all of those children, my peers at the time, really playing those instruments. And I signed up to play saxophone. And I went home all excited to tell my mom that I joined band for junior high school, and she tried to talk me out of it. I had quit piano lessons several years earlier from lack of practice, and she just didn't know that it would become my life's work at the time. We laugh about it today because it was the pivotal moment in my life. I studied music throughout the rest of schooling and took lessons from some very wonderful teachers. One of my largest mentors was a gentleman by the name of Richard Bush, and he was my private teacher growing up, and he was a wonderful woodwind musician and also technician. And so my lessons were a mixture of how to play the instrument and how to make the instrument function properly and be in good working order. I had school-owned instruments at the time, and so part of my lessons was to make them totally functional. And that that really shaped, again, my direction in the music business.
At that point when you were taking lessons, what was the instrument of choice at the time, or what instrument were you playing?
Oh, I was studying bassoon
Okay.
with Richard, and as well as clarinet and saxophone.
Okay. Multiple instruments then.
Multiple instruments. As a young saxophonist, many band directors realized that there was a dozen of us in the beginning band, and I remember my teacher looking at us and saying, next year in the cadet band, I think I only have room for 4 alto saxophones. And, I'm sitting here looking at this line of alto saxophone players in beginning band. And he's like, but I need clarinet players, French horn players, and a bassoonist. And I had seen a bassoon and thought it sounded very interesting. And I raised my hand and said, I'll learn the bassoon, Mr. Shin. My junior high band director was a Southern Baptist, and he praised Jesus in the classroom that I said I would play the bassoon. He was a wonderful person.
That's great.
And he gave me a bassoon and sent me into his office for the last quarter of my 7th grade year, my beginning band year, and I learned to play bassoon. I started with lessons with a local teacher named Cheryl Blackley. And I studied with her until she kicked me out and said, I can't teach you anymore about the bassoon. You need to go study with Richard. So that's what I did. And so, I started studying multiple instruments all through school. And that's kind of what got me into music. And then when I got to college, I had a unique opportunity to go work for a music store. And
when you were in college, Ryan, what was your major there?
Music education.
Okay.
Music education was what I was going to school for, and I met and fell in love with my wife, Rochelle, in 1997, 1998. And she was also a music education major.
Yeah, I was going to say, she was, as a side note, she's also into music, right?
Yes, very much. When she joined a band as a young person in beginning band, she knew right then and there that she wanted to be a band director, a music teacher. And that's been her whole life. Is teaching music, and teaching beginning band is really where her love and her passion is. So very proud of her and the career that she has. But in the two of us studying music education together, it was interesting when I was approached by Burt Murdoch, who owned a music store in Utah where I grew up, and asked if I would come work for him as an education rep. I'd never heard of this before. When I was in school, there was no store reps that would come into my band room and visit with my teacher at the time. I didn't ever see this side of the industry as a young person growing up. It was very foreign to me. So when he phoned Weber State University, where I was attending school, he spoke to our director of bands, Dr. Thomas Root. Was our director of bands at the time, and he said, I'm looking for someone to come work for my company that can call on music educators, that can be an educational representative for my music store, and that knows things about products that we're selling and can counsel with them and teach them and help them. And I'm looking for somebody that's, young and energetic and knows a lot about instruments and band. And so Dr. Root said, well, I think I have the perfect person in my program. So I was introduced to Bert at that time. And after some counsel and some talking, I decided to take him up on that position, on that job.
So Ryan, why do you think Dr. Root chose you at that time?
Well, I was the equipment manager for the band. I also was the librarian for the orchestra. When I was at university, I was playing bassoon in the orchestra, and I was working in the music office for Dr. Palumbo, our orchestra teacher, but I was also the equipment manager for the band and always helping with equipment there. I was the drum major for the marching band, and I wrote the shows, and I led rehearsals, and I was just very involved in pretty much all aspects of the music program. I helped with the summer camp where we had younger students come into Weber State to teach during the summer. So I was just really involved. And when my colleagues wanted to purchase a better instrument. They wanted to buy better equipment, or they were just interested in upping their game a little bit. I was often the person called on to help them.
Why is that?
I don't know. I guess I was a good set of ears. I could go with them to the music store and listen to them and help them find the best instrument for them. And it just seemed to be something that I was, I don't know if I should say that I was really gifted at it, but I had good ears, and people learned to lean on me a little bit, and I would help them research and purchase, and I enjoyed that part, actually, even for instruments that I didn't play.
So it was something you were interested in. It sounds like pretty early on, equipment and in products and how it helps people in different ways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that came from my lessons with Richard. Him having his own shop and being an instrument technician and teaching me that along the way. I even, when I got to university, took additional repair lessons instead of studying. I took lessons on flute and on clarinet and on bassoon and on saxophone. I studied all those instruments while at school, but I also, for a semester or two, took lessons on repair. And that was something that was unique. But I was always interested in the mechanics of the products, of the instruments themselves, how they function.
Okay. So as history would show, you did take the job as an ed rep.
I did. I started out at the music store, and we were, this was not the premier music store of the state that I lived in, and it wasn't actually where I shopped. But when I met Bert, I really liked him. He was a musician himself. He had a big band, and I really got to grow fond of him over the dozen years that I worked for him. He was a wonderful person, and I'm glad I did that, took him up on that experience, because it really taught me a lot about this industry, more than I knew going into it, for sure. But I didn't really know what an ed rep was. I didn't really know what the job was, and he had never really done it before either. He just knew that this was something that he wanted to put more emphasis in.
Okay.
His company did band and orchestra rentals, but the primary focus of his store when I got hired was pianos and home organs. Huh. And I mean, he was probably the largest home organ dealer in the Intermountain West at the time. Okay. A lot of the emphasis of his company was on that, and that market was shrinking dramatically. When I got hired, so he was switching focuses, and him hiring me was to switch those focuses to a more band and orchestra oriented company.
Okay. And just for reference, what year was this you started to be an ed rep?
2000. So okay. It was in the year 2000. I worked for Burt Murdoch Music from 2000 to 2011, so 12 years, just shy of 12 years. And I was an ed rep the whole time, pretty much. Even when I went into the office, even when I started managing the store and started managing the rental department and the B&O department of the store, basically, I was still an ed rep all the way through. I'd still call on schools, and it never left me, even when we had other ed reps that worked for the company.
And it is your time as an ed rep that I really want to talk about today. But I'd kind of like to finish your journey through the music industry and how you got to be where you are today. So you were an ed rep and you worked at Burt Murdoch through 2011. What happened then?
Well, in 2009, Burt passed away, and that was a real blow. And I knew that in a family business, when your last name isn't the same as the family, there's only so far you can take yourself, or so far you can go. And I loved my time with Burt Murdoch Music. It just wasn't where I could see myself finishing my career. There was just a time for me to leave, and that was that time. I spent about 2 years after Burt died working for the company, and came upon this opportunity to come work for Eastman. And I was looking at other places too. I was looking at other companies in the music industry where I might go and work and develop my talents more. But after meeting Chen for the first time, there was something that drew me to him that I just felt inspired almost to say, okay, no, this is the person I want to work for. And, there wasn't a position open when I met Chen. I waited over a year. It was about 18 months, I think, from the time that I wanted to work at Eastman until the time I actually got a position here at Eastman. And there just wasn't an opening for me. And so there was finally an opening. And I was able to take advantage of that. And I started to work as a regional sales manager for Eastman. Almost immediately after starting my journey with Eastman as a regional sales manager, the sales manager who I reported to came to me and said, we'd like you to start doing some product management and helping with the products and fixing concerns and issues and working with the factory and doing this, that, and the other. And I think a year later is when I started to really take on product management as a part-time assignment in addition to my assignment as a regional sales manager.
Okay.
And then that led to me becoming the product manager full-time. And then I think it was I don't remember the year actually. It was maybe 5 years ago, 2016, I guess. Chen asked me if I would serve as the vice president of the company and, lead the product team and work with the sales team and mentor some of our managers throughout the company with Haynes and Shires and so forth and so on. So,
And for reference, if Chen is a new name to those listening, Chen is the owner and founder of Eastman.
Yes, Chen Ni. He's the one who started this whole thing.
So our careers in music, yours and mine, Ryan, have been really quite interweaved for many years now. And I want to go back to the time you were an ed rep and the first time I had first heard your name. I moved from the Chicago area with my wife to Utah because we wanted to move to the mountains. And we decided we wanted to move to Salt Lake City after taking a ski trip there. And so basically I sent my resume to a couple of music stores in the area. I got a call from Summer Hayes Music, and then Summer Hayes Music hires me as an ed rep and assigns me a territory to go visit. And very quickly, when I was out there visiting teachers, I learned the name Ryan Richman. And I learned it's very difficult competition. Teachers would talk about you, and they would talk about how much you knew about products, and they looked to you for advice, and they respected you very much about what you knew about instruments and accessories and brands and the history of the music industry and everything about it. And it wasn't just school teachers, I realized. It was also private teachers as well. And your interaction with them at a very high level, and the types of instruments you would sell them, and the level of trust the private teachers had in you as well, was really remarkable. And there's this term that was kind of thrown around at places like NASMD, which I was very lucky to be able to attend many times as an ed rep. And the term was trusted advisor. It was very clear to me that you were the trusted advisor in the area, that people would call you for all sorts of advice on what they should buy. So that's what I want to talk about with you to start, is how did you learn so much information about music products in general, and why did you learn so much about it?
Well, that's a good question. The why, I don't know. I mean, I was always driven with a very, I don't want to call it an obsessive personality, but you could probably term it that way. And a real love of, musical products, musical instruments. They fascinated me as a young person. It's always been something that I've been highly motivated to learn more about and to really immerse myself in the study of it. And there isn't, when I was young, of school age, I don't think there was a music business class or degree or anything like that. There wasn't, there isn't a place where you can go learn about the history of instrument making. And so it was like, well, you had to be self-taught a little bit. So you had to seek out these things. I would obsess over brochures. I mean, I would collect them, and I would read every sentence, probably to the point of memorization from the companies that I dealt with. And So it was just a burning desire to know everything I could possibly know about all of these things, and then to actually experience them and try them. I mean, I was a buyer and seller of saxophones from a young age. I like dozens and dozens of them. Would buy them, perform on them, play on them, study on them, sell them to a student, buy a different one, repeat over and over again. So owning every major brand of a product and living with it for a while and performing on it was something that I just did naturally, not even thinking about it. But it gave me a real experience with those products, and it taught me where they were great and where there were flaws. And so, yeah, I sought out that information anywhere I could find it. And it was something that was really important to me so that I could give that advice, so that I could help my friends. I mean, it started before I worked at the music store even, listening to my friends play trumpet or horn or trombone or anything like that. Like I was into it, and I was helping them with their selections, and they just, I don't know why they felt that my opinion or advice was good, but it seemed to work out. And with these teachers all throughout the Wasatch Front, I would just call on them like I would do my friends, like, can I help you with these products? Can I help your students find their voice, find their instrument? I guess I became that simply by, I don't know how to put it even. It was just natural for me, I guess.
It was something you were naturally interested in, so you dug into every detail.
Yeah.
So how did the base of knowledge that you gained on products and reading the brochures and probably talking to manufacturer reps, how did this serve you as an ed rep? And why do you think it's important to have that kind of base of knowledge as an ed rep?
Well, the way it served me was when somebody would ask, they were struggling with, a problem with an instrument or with a musical number that needed, like it needed this kind of sound, or it needed this particular product, or I'm struggling with my trumpet players, or I'm struggling with my clarinet section, or, can you help me? Here's what's going on. What would you suggest? Is there something that can help them? And being able to offer the advice to that teacher with a solution that was real, that wasn't just manufactured, that wasn't like, well, you could try this, or you should try this mouthpiece, or maybe you should try, this type of product. But it was advice that I believed in, when we carried products at the store, it was products that I believed in and wanted to sell and would play on and buy myself. I think that's something that in sales training we could talk about more, is that, if you can't picture yourself buying and using this product, why would you think somebody else should?
Yeah.
So
it grows your confidence, right, in
right.
the product if you actually experience it.
Absolutely. So I just drew from my own lifetime experience of being in band, being a musician, playing in school and professionally, and said this product really worked for me, or this product really worked for my private students. And I think this could help you in that situation. And the key is if you give them good advice, if you've done your homework, if you know what these products do and how they perform, then by giving that positive advice, that good advice that actually, bears fruit at the end, it actually helped them with their situation, then they start to trust you even more and believe that you have the correct answers for their questions. And I mean, I think this is my 10th year at Eastman, and I still get calls from teachers that say, hey, I'm thinking about getting a new, XYZ. What do you think?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
They haven't been your customers for over a decade now, and they're still calling you.
Some, yeah. I mean, it's definitely lessened as the years go on, but I still get friends that call me up and say, hey, I want to get this. It's not even necessarily for their classroom, but like now for their children or their grandchildren. I'll get a call saying, hey, what do you think? I want to get my grandson this, or my granddaughter that. So yeah, I've worked very hard to make sure that the advice that I give is good advice, that I recommend the right mouthpieces or the right type of product to help their situation. And my wife is a band director, like we talked about. If I recommend something to her and it doesn't work in her classroom, you know that I'm going to hear about that. And,
Sure will.
So I guess that's given me another perspective as well, is to make sure that I take the role of trusted advisor. Like you said, I take it pretty seriously, because if I want to make sure that if I wouldn't buy it, or if my wife wouldn't buy it, that I wouldn't sell it to anyone else either.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, as your competition back in the day, it was very difficult to try to talk someone out of something you recommended to something I recommended, because they trusted you so much. And I think to the ed reps out there, that's a huge reason to gain the kind of knowledge that Ryan pursued in products in the industry. Is if you start to be trusted as much as Ryan still is today amongst the teachers, it's really tough for your competition to catch up. So Ryan, I'd like to ask you, what kind of advice would you give an ed rep out there? I mean, the breadth of knowledge in the music product world is so vast. Where do you start if you want to start really building your knowledge and gaining this library of information as an ed rep, and you want to become a trusted advisor to customers? Where do you start?
Well, I think you have to have a real passion and love for the subject matter. And I would say start with where you're comfortable, where you have the most interest. I was a woodwind musician firstly. And so learning everything I could about woodwinds goes back to my childhood. Brass instruments, percussion instruments, those types of things. That came later. That came later when I was in the role of being an ed rep and going to visit these teachers and discovering that not all of their questions were about saxophones and clarinets. It was, I had to go out of my comfort zone of what I was most interested in and most passionate about. But I had a pretty good foundation with the products and the instruments that I studied and taught, that it allowed me to branch out from there. So really I started, focusing on something that I could completely devote my energy to, which was, understanding the saxophone, understanding the bassoon, all of the woodwind family really. And then branching out to other families of products. And so I would suggest to anyone, start learning, in one subject matter so that you're an expert. Don't be afraid to say you don't know something, to your teachers, because the role of trusted advisor isn't that you're a know-it-all, that you know everything about everything, but that if you don't know something or you don't have a solution, that you're not just going to give them a line and say, just buy this because this is what is supposed to be good. But say, I don't really know. Let me go research that and I'll help you. So having that conversation with teachers saying, I don't know, but I'll find out, isn't a bad thing, because you can't know everything about everything. And even today, there are things that I want to research more. I want to learn more about. I want to understand more fully. And I don't have any, problem saying, man, I don't really know about that product or that subject. Let me do some research. Let me check into it and I'll get back to you.
When you first started building your knowledge, technology was different then. You started as an ed rep in 2000, you said? Mm-hmm. And technology's just changed in 21 years, and sources of information has changed. What kind of sources of information would you suggest ed reps start with today?
Oh, goodness. Boy, back in that day when I started doing all this, Facebook didn't, there was nothing. Facebook didn't exist. There was nothing out there like that where you could have so much opinion thrown at you. The idea of asking the hive mind for advice almost makes me cringe a little bit because, what qualifications does anyone have to give advice to someone you don't know across however much, landmass in a virtual world? I wouldn't suggest going there for knowledge and advice, simply because while everyone is good intentioned, everyone's experience level is different. And asking a simple, 2-sentence question on a forum only to receive 100 opinions back without any other backstory or any knowledge of your situation or your students or anything like that, there's going to be more confusion than most people want to wade through, I believe. Mm-hmm. So, back when I started learning, it was reading a lot of things. It was finding, of course, literature from the company, but it was also like reading, even going as far as like reading dissertations on certain musical matters. Also, learning from my teachers was a big deal. If you think about it, as an ed rep, you have a community of teachers that have a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in different areas of teaching.
Right.
And to be able to be a central hub, ask them. If you get a question from a teacher in a certain district and it's about a subject matter that you have another teacher in another district that is perfectly suited to answer that, go find out that answer. Like if you know that somebody's really good at teaching a concept or teaching a certain instrument, use them as your resource to teach other people. You're kind of like this hub in a way. And so some of my knowledge came from doing the job and dealing with all these teachers and being interested in their successes and what really worked for them so that I could recommend that to other teachers. So that's a big deal,
That's a great point.
Understanding all of those players involved.
Instead of brochures, like you said you would read before, it seems like brochures have kind of gone online, like websites, right?
Yep, they sure have. It's a different thing too. I mean, I remember when there was a lot more information about instruments printed, comparisons, a lot of manufacturing details. There was just a lot more information in the old literature about the products than there is nowadays. And I think, some of society's a little bit to blame, I think. If you can't get your message across in 99 seconds or 59 seconds or whatever the formula is, people are going to keep scrolling. And so finding a place to post that kind of information isn't really wanted much anymore, So it becomes challenging. And you have to learn to read through some of the marketing speak that's in a lot of literature and brochures, focus on the specs, focus on the real meat and potatoes of the products to understand what its use is. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get understanding what the use of these products are and how they're going to help these teachers accomplish their goals. So,
yeah. Back in your time in retail, would you spend much time talking with the manufacturer reps that would call on you?
I did. I dealt with all of them. I purchased from them. And I would talk to them about products, and I would give my feedback a lot on the way the horns, were built, especially because, that's where my comfort zone is. And I would learn from all of them. I would learn from all the reps that would come in for percussion, for winds, for strings. And it was definitely a learning process, but I took it really seriously. I wanted to understand their companies, and I wanted to understand, where their products come from and help make a good judgment call on how good that product is for my teachers, for these students. But yeah, I would talk with them quite a bit, and I would lean on them for help, and I would also make sure they understood if I thought a product could be better. I wasn't shy about saying that something wasn't going to work in our store because it just didn't perform well enough, or it wasn't built well enough, or and sometimes they didn't like me very much, but I think there was there was always a mutual respect there. And I remember one instance when one year I said I wouldn't buy a certain product from a manufacturer, and I told him the reasons why, and a year later he came with a new product, and of course I tested it out, and it was substantially better than the old one, and we started buying it, and he was so happy to bring this new instrument in and say, look, this is all new. This is, you didn't like the old one, play this one. And it was good,
So I'd like to throw out there that manufacturer reps also should be trusted advisors to ed reps, and for ed reps to not be afraid to pick up the phone and call the people who really know the products you carry well. And as long as you consider them a trusted advisor, listen to what they have to say about the products and the best uses for it. And don't be afraid to share, like Ryan said, share your experience with those products and if it's working out well or if it's not, because that kind of information is invaluable to a manufacturer to do exactly what Ryan just said. Listen to what was really happening out in the field, call your manufacturer rep, and sometimes those changes can actually be made at the factory.
Yeah, it's a great point. I remember when the manufacturer rep used to visit, we would always clean the store and dress a little nicer, and it was an event. It was a big deal when the factory rep came to the store back in the day. And it goes on both sides. For people in the manufacturing field, if you give your dealer customers great advice and they see how that product works and is as advertised, then they're going to have more trust and more faith, and it's just goes down the line, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we talked about current sources for information. You have websites of manufacturers. You have other teachers who are experts in particular areas. We talked about talking to your manufacturer rep who may have a particular knowledge in that line that you carry of theirs. Are there any other sources, Ryan, that you would suggest an ed rep pursue finding knowledge from?
The other place I guess you could go is to other dealerships which are in your group. If you belong to NASMD or if you belong to a certain group where you've got other ed reps in the field in other states that are experiencing similar questions or similar needs for advice. There's a whole lot of people out there doing our job, and some of them have more experience than others. And so if we could glean on some of that experience, that could be a very interesting collaboration. I think NASMD does a wonderful job of that.
Absolutely.
Going and visiting with colleagues in other areas. When I was in retail, my retail store didn't really participate in that group. So I didn't have that resource. Working for Eastman and participating in that group, seeing the knowledge that can be shared back and forth, it's really astounding what a good resource other ed reps are that maybe we don't compete with.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. I remember my first NASMD, which, if that's a new term to you, that's the National Association of School Music Dealers, that has a conference every year, and it kind of travels throughout the country.
Yeah.
And they have specific courses during the day, and one of the I guess tracks is for ed reps, and it's amazing what you learn from other ed reps talking about being an ed rep, both during those courses, but also just socializing afterwards and sharing those ideas with each other. I remember the first time I went, it just blew my mind, and it changed the course of my being an ed rep from all the knowledge I learned. You're right, Ryan, talking to a network of other ed reps out there.
Yeah.
It can be so powerful.
Yeah. I really missed out on that in my experience. It was one of those things where I just had to build my own network and my own knowledge base. But it's been very eye-opening to go to that conference and to visit with those people and to see that community.
Right.
That was actually started by a manufacturer. NASMD was a group that was founded by an instrument maker to bring dealers together that call on schools. And,
it was a good idea.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's such a great organization.
Yeah.
I remember back in the early 2000s in kind of watching you work out there in the field. You were extraordinary at selling step-up instruments. Yeah. Particularly through private teachers.
Yeah.
And I really want to dig into this because it's something that I think other people can really learn from. Can you talk about kind of a system you set up to sell step-up instruments through your private teacher network that you knew?
You bet. Well, I just drew on my own experience. I just drew on me as a student. And I loved musical instruments. I would beg my parents to buy me the new latest and greatest. I remember subscribing to the Instrumentalist magazine when I was in high school and junior high and high school, and the Saxophone Journal and Downbeat magazine, and I would get all this stuff. I was just, it was my life. It was everything. And I had wonderful band directors in school. I wonderful teachers in junior high and high school and college that were wonderful educators. But they didn't really teach me about the instrument, It was all about the music. It was about rehearsal and blending and phrasing, and it was about playing in a band or orchestra. It wasn't about, this mouthpiece or this reed strength or this saxophone or this bassoon or this is the way you should cut or scrape your bassoon reeds or you need, it was none of that. It wasn't anything about my individual performance necessarily that I was learning from my high school teachers. It was all my private teachers. And I was really blessed to have wonderful private teachers. Growing up, my parents were very supportive. And I had 2 private lessons a week going through high school with 2 teachers.
Wow.
On different instruments. And then in college, I continued to do that. I took more than one set of private lessons every term, every semester. And those teachers were the teachers that influenced me on, when you get a professional saxophone or when you get your own bassoon or when I started to learn bass clarinet or baritone saxophone or oboe or flute, or as I expanded my range as a woodwind musician, it was my private teachers that had the biggest influence on me on what I should buy. And so as an ed rep for a music store, I was visiting band directors and orchestra directors for one primary purpose. It was to get the rental night, right? That was everything. It was okay, if you can service them well and sell them all their accessories and goods and music and all that stuff, but really we want to be there when the kids start and rent those instruments to those students. But what about step-ups? What about when they want a professional clarinet or a wooden clarinet, or when they want a professional saxophone, or a double French horn, or a trombone with an F attachment? How do I reach them through the band director? How do I reach a student that wants a better viola or better bass through the orchestra teacher? That really wasn't the right path, I didn't think, because those teachers didn't influence me in my youth. And so I started to seek out and find private teachers that had really good studios that taught the kids that got scholarships, that had success in their studio, that had, that were energetic and pushing their students musically. Those are essentially the ones that really want better products, better instruments in their kids' hands, better mouthpieces, better reeds, better sticks, better, equipment. And so I started to develop a relationship with them. And again, it's a lot of, how can I help you questions? What kind of clarinet do you like? What kind of saxophone do you like? Why do you like it? Have you tried this? Have you seen that? And then it's a lot of visiting. It's a lot of saying, hey, can you try this clarinet for me? What do you think of it? I'm thinking of carrying it at the store. And I just kind of built a rapport with these private teachers that I was listening to them, that I wanted what's best for their students, that, I'm like them. I taught private lessons. I was a member of the community. And so seeking out those private teachers and understanding what their preferences were, and also becoming somebody that would bring in new products for their advice, for their opinion, for their input, developed a relationship where when they had a student that needed a new instrument, they would call me. And I would say, well, let me bring by a half a dozen instruments, and let me just leave them in your studio so that you can have this student test them and play them, and you can hear them in your environment. You're not at a music store. You don't have a salesman breathing down your neck. It's completely in your comfort zone, in your environment, so you can hear them. These teachers have heard these students play for years sometimes in this environment. They understand how they sound. They understand their strengths or weaknesses. And for them to audition an instrument in their environment is way more powerful than in a practice room at a music store.
So you literally bring the instruments to the teacher's house or college studio or wherever they physically were.
Yep, absolutely. And as this plan kind of developed, and as my relationship with the private teachers grew, it became very normal for me to drop off a set of instruments at, say, the beginning of a new term or beginning of a new semester when especially at a university level, where the private student would come in to university with their student product or their intermediate product that they have from high school and junior high and whatnot. And now they're in the big leagues, right? They're in the collegiate studio, the university studio, and it's time to get a real pro instrument. I would just go and And I knew the teacher's preferences. I knew exactly what he or she wanted because of the time spent cultivating that relationship. So I would get a call. I have new students coming in. I would take as many instruments as I could spare, leave them for 2 weeks, and sometimes I wouldn't even meet the people. I would just go pick up checks. Or,
amazing.
Or get a phone call saying, hey, my son or daughter takes lessons from so-and-so. They've been trying your instrument. We'd like to get it. And I would just do a transaction over the phone. And then I would just pick up the ones that weren't purchased. And this was something that it didn't just happen overnight. It was building those relationships. It was creating that rapport with those teachers so that they trusted me that I was bringing them the good stuff.
Going back to this trusted advisor, you weren't just the trusted advisor to band and orchestra teachers. You were very much trusted by these private teachers, which requires another level of knowledge, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, they're specialists. Like, it's not so much a level of knowledge, but it's a level of understanding. You understand their expertise, and you can have a conversation with them and a dialogue with them that's meaningful. You can talk on their level, so to speak. They're not talking to somebody that knows nothing about what they're teaching, but they're the expert, right? They are the teacher here of the student. They are the university professor. They're the one that spent their life studying and getting high-level degrees in these products. You'd be foolish to think that you know more about them than that person. I mean, that's their life's work too.
Right.
So it's not necessarily about being the expert or whatnot, but someone that you can have a dialogue and share experiences with. Because I trust them as much as they trust me many times. Like, the teachers that I would seek out are teachers that I would take lessons from myself, or teachers that I would have my children take lessons from because of my belief in their product too. Their teaching experience. And it worked out very well. In fact, my children today take lessons from the people I used to call on.
Oh, that's fair. That's great. I'm curious, Ryan, I'm sure you sold step-up instruments to band students, not through the private teachers. And I'm curious if you saw a difference in the level of instrument that a band kid not taking private lessons kind of walked into the music store. Did you see a difference in the instruments that they would buy versus the instruments a student of a private teacher would buy that you were working with?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my goodness, yes. When you have a student that takes private lessons from a competent teacher, the level of musicianship that can be achieved is far superior than just taking a music class at school. I think every band director out there would agree that private instruction will always produce the best musicians. And therefore, they will notice the nuance more of a professional instrument. They will notice the increased capacity that instrument has for them to express their musicianship. When we design musical instruments, we design them for a particular person. Student model instruments are designed to do a couple things really well, but not necessarily play on the professional stage. And as you make instruments with more professional features, more professional resonance, sound quality, timbre, response, all of those things that just increase the ability of the performer to express themselves. If you have the training from a really wonderful private teacher, those students are going to notice and appreciate those nuances in the instrument versus somebody who just takes class, band or orchestra class. Mm-hmm. When, I'm sure that every music store employee that has done an appointment with a student that takes lessons versus doesn't take lessons. Sometimes when they want a new instrument and they don't take private lessons and they come into the store, sometimes you end up giving them a private lesson, so that mom and dad can actually hear the difference. Mm-hmm. I can't, and it's always the same things, right? It's use more air.
Right. Number one.
Number one. Oh, you're not putting enough air through your wind instrument, or, a string instrument, don't be so timid, use some more bow. It's one of those situations where, when you have a teacher present, they counsel the student. You're just there to facilitate showing the products, and then the teacher sells the horn or the violin or they're the ones that are really making that transaction because this is their student, right? And so if you don't have that with a customer, then essentially you become that. You become that advisor by default because their teacher isn't there. So you're the one that has to say, no, you sound better on this or you sound better on that. And, most parents will be like, well, I can't hear anything. I don't have an ear. And you're like, no. You can hear. Listen. Tell me which one you like better. Here, let's have Johnny play these 2 trumpets. You close your eyes and you tell me which one sounds better. And, there's a gamble with that. Like, he sounds better on the one he's played for 2 years. Well, let's try something different. Put more air through it. Oh, wow, I can hear a difference. There's those situations that happen. But it's always different. The level of product that you can sell to a student with private lessons is far higher than one without.
Did you find with the private student customers that the ability to close the sale or know that you're going to get a sale, was it more consistent with private teacher students, that it wasn't so much, are you going to buy an instrument, as which one will you buy?
Oh, absolutely. Because you've already done the legwork. If that teacher trusts what you're selling and that's the one that they want, first of all, the parent trusts the teacher. I mean, they send their student to be with them on a weekly basis. This is a mentor for their child. And so the parents put a lot of trust into that teacher before they've even met you. And so their word is more important than your word, right? And
Right.
If you realize that as a salesperson or an ed rep selling musical products, if you disagree with the private teacher, then you should probably examine yourself as far as that goes, because the parent has put all the trust in the teacher. That's why they're there. That's why they send their kids there every single week. So the likelihood of an instrument purchase really comes down to if you've done your job with the private teacher, if you've done your job to build that confidence and be that trusted advisor to the teacher, then it's just a matter of the teacher saying, this is the one that, little Johnny or little Susie should have. And then the parent saying, well, here's our budget, here's this and that. There's all those things you work out. But if you have the support of the teacher and the teacher has the support of the parent, then like I said, when I had those situations where I would just take instruments to the studio, I wouldn't even meet these people in person a lot of the times because they trusted their teacher so much. And I would just leave a price list. Here's how much this one will cost.
And the teacher did the rest of the work.
Yeah, a lot of times. I mean, a lot of the times that's the way it worked. I mean, I did my fair share of in-store appointments, and I had my fair share of teachers that came and teachers that didn't. I even had teachers that said, just go see Ryan, and they would come into the store and I would help them pick out their instrument. There were those types of situations too. But again, it's having that teacher's faith in you that you're going to sell them what they want you to sell them and what works in their studio. And, there's been instances where I thought that a student sounded better on a product that the teacher didn't endorse. And so you have those conversations. Look, Johnny sounded better on this and actually a lot better. Sometimes there was disagreements as far as like what was best for the student, but I always defaulted to the teacher and I would always tell the parents, look, I think he sounds better on this, or she sounds better on this, but you have this private teacher. They are wonderful. They are going to, help your child grow musically, and they believe that this is a better path for them. So I would never try to default the trust that a parent has in a teacher.
So to a lot of ed reps out there, and myself included, when I was an ed rep, I didn't think much about private teachers in the way that you interacted with them. And it sounds like it was a very powerful way to sell not just more step-ups, but higher-end step-ups as well. And I'm curious, Ryan, if you were to give advice to someone who's on the road today and they spend, like most ed reps, the majority of their time with public school, private school, band and orchestra teachers, and they want to start developing relationships with these private teachers as in the way that you did, where do they start?
Well, I think you start with your biggest programs. right? If you've got a junior high and high school system that you are really close with and really tight with, and they're your customers, you have a lot of rentals there, find out who teaches the private lessons to their students. Start there. Start with the private teachers that are involved, that you have rental instruments in their studio right now. And so work with your biggest programs, work with your biggest supporters, find out who, because see, again, trusted advisor. Who does the band director trust to send their students to improve their musicianship? Who does the orchestra teacher trust to send their students to improve those students' musicianship? If you can understand who that teacher believes and trusts as the private teacher, then that's a really great referral and reference right there. So I would start with exactly that. Find your biggest supporters in your school, music educators. Find out who their biggest supporters are for private instruction.
So it's simply a matter of asking your best customers, your best teachers, who they send their students to for private lessons.
Yeah. That's how that's really how I started, is understanding who is the biggest private teacher in this school district or in this town or whatnot, and going to them and saying, look, I'm carrying this. Is there things I'm not carrying, firstly? And here's the things I am carrying. And, I'd love to work with you and help your students, get the musical products that you want them to have.
Great advice. So Ryan, your knowledge that you've gained through the years from being a student, being an ed rep, being in retail, I'm curious how all of that affects what you do today at Eastman with how you develop products.
Well, I think we all draw on our experience to do things, right? So my experience being a musician, being a father, being in band, being married to a band director, like that all contributes to making decisions on product design or, durability versus playability. There's all these things that come into the equation when you're developing a product. I'm a father of three. My greatest accomplishment is, of course, my children. And it's beautiful to see them studying music. Not only like in our home, but they also take private lessons, and we started them early. We started all of our children on their musical instrument when they were 7 years old. Wow. Little tiny curved flutes, and my middle one on an E-flat clarinet, and my smallest on a bassoon in G. These tiny little toy-like instruments. But having them learn and watching them study and using products that are real products, they're not like toys. I could see where they were good, where they needed help, where the products really performed beautifully, where they really didn't perform beautifully as your student gets more advanced. Intonation's important. For young people, probably, you don't want to make a student model instrument that plays out of tune. So the scale, that you develop to create a really beautiful high-end instrument that's got wonderful intonation, use that intonation on the student model. Seems logical. So learning from my children, seeing their musical journey, learning from my wife, who is a band director, and her students, and seeing what she struggles with the products that are in her classroom. That all comes into the equation when I'm working with our team, saying, "Okay, we're going to make a student tuba, or we're going to make a student clarinet, or we're going to make a new student saxophone or trumpet or whatnot." So you draw on all those life experiences, and you really think about what's best for the child. What will help that student, that young musician, grow and develop into whatever they want to be. And if you put something that is difficult to play or not fun, like just a challenge all the time, it will be discouraging. And so, when I got put in as product manager, early on with Eastman, we weren't really in the wind business so much. When I came to work for Eastman, I remember one of my friends in the music industry and in retail, looking at me and going, why do you want to go to work for a string company? You're a band guy. Like, you're really a band guy. What do you see here? And I just remember with Chen seeing his vision of what Eastman could become. And I really wanted to be part of that. And so, early on, I tell this story a lot. When I first became the product manager, my biggest concern was when somebody would pick up our trumpet and push the valve down, that it would return. Like that. that was
basic.
Yeah, like that was number one. Like, okay, somebody picks up our brass instrument, pushes the valve down, it comes back. Let's get all, and I joke about that, but there's a lot of truth to that. You want to make a product that can be as good as it can be, and it takes time. It takes development. It takes practice. We're a youngster when it comes to making these products in this industry, and we understand that we're the youngster, but we take all of the criticisms and the suggestions and the comments so seriously. And that's really what started me down the product management path, is just to listen to dealers, listen to repair technicians, listen to educators. I remember one of my first Midwests, a teacher came up to me and said, "I don't like your bottom caps on your trumpet very much." I said, "Okay, what don't you like about them?" And she came and she showed me. And it was very simple, little design thing that we just didn't have in our instruments. And it was so simple that I wrote to our factory and I said, "Hey, can we change our valve cap by adding this little dam at the bottom, basically? Little metal. Don't machine it flat. Give us a little lip there." And sure, no problem. Teach us. We want to learn. We want to know more. And so listening to teachers, being married to a teacher, having children that are studying music, being a student myself, all of that influence, all of that experience goes into how we design music products today to meet those needs and to fix the things that I find deficient through my own experience. It's all related.
Certainly. And I can tell you, being an Eastman rep today, it gives me great confidence knowing that you're kind of at the helm of all the products. And I know that it comes from a place of real world experience in the changes you make. And it's been phenomenal to watch the growth of Eastman Winds. So thanks for all the work you've been doing.
Oh, thank you. It means a lot. I love what I do. I love being here at Eastman. I appreciate our competition. I appreciate the people that have come before me, before us. I love this business, and I'm a huge fan of a lot of instrument makers throughout time. And I, hopefully can learn from them, and still do. And I believe that by taking all that information and that desire to build wonderful products is really at the heart of what we do. So I appreciate your kind words. It's been a really wonderful journey, and you spoke earlier in the show about when you first heard my name. It was a wonderful rivalry in a way between you and I, and a great amount of respect on both sides.
Certainly.
And it's really lovely that we get to work so closely now, understanding and being competitive with each other for a long time. Mm-hmm. Maybe, what was it, 8 or so years that we were competing against each other?
Yeah, 8 or 9,
yeah.
I think. Yeah.
And now we've worked together for nearly 8 years. And I think we should all remember that, when we're in these competitive situations, to understand that, one of these days you may work together. So
the music world is very, very small. And sometimes I'll actually share the story of you and I competing together and then working together. And it's a lesson in never burning your bridge, even with your competitors. Because like you said, you never know, because the music world's so small, you never know when you'll be working together. Yeah. And if I had burned my bridge with you back when we were competing, I wouldn't be here today. You wouldn't have suggested my name to work for Eastman in the first place. So it's a great story in respecting your competitors. You can compete, but you don't have to be enemies. Yep. And you can respect each other And actually be glad that you have competition because it pushes you. I know for a fact that I became a better ed rep because I had such stiff competition out there with you. It made me better. So
Same.
Yeah. So never burn a bridge. That's the moral of the story.
Same.
Yeah. Ryan, I so appreciate your time today and opening up your experience and your knowledge with us. And I always say you don't need Google when you're looking for instrument knowledge. Just ask Ryan. And your knowledge base is something we can all aspire to. And I hope that we got across today that having a great knowledge base in the products that you sell and the various places that you can go, search out that information and how you can apply that knowledge to become a trusted advisor to band and orchestra teachers and private teachers can be so powerful. And if we at Eastman can be a source of that information, please feel free to reach out. We're really here to offer anything we can offer when it comes to advice or knowledge on the products themselves. If you're an Eastman dealer and you have an Eastman rep, I know they'd love to hear from you. We're always happy to talk, and we'll learn from you too, which is so important for us as a manufacturer.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Ryan.
Thank you, Shane. I appreciate it.
We hope you found the information in this episode useful and something you can use in your everyday life as an ed rep. If there is a topic you'd like to learn more about and have presented on a future episode of Ed Rep Radio, or you'd like to give us some feedback in general, please email us at edrepradio@eastmanstrings.com. To learn more about Eastman Music Company, go to our website, eastmanmusiccompany.com, or give your Eastman rep a call. Thanks, and drive safe.